Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irarangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E haere ake nei at 12:51 today, silence. As people pause to remember the deadly Christchurch quake a decade on. Auckland's COVID alert level drops to 1 at midnight, but is there a smarter way to handle outbreaks? Businesses think so, but what about the COVID response minister? Well, let's ask him. We drill into why coronavirus has prompted some dentists to bump up their prices. Roll up your sleeves, that is. Auckland port workers and managed isolation staff at a Wellington hotel get the Pfizer jab. Right now, on the rising tide, volunteers and dock rangers are trying to refloat 40 whales stranded at Farewell Spit. We will go live to the rescue.
RNZ News at 5, kia ora, ko Susana Lei Atawa tēnei. Auckland will join the rest of New Zealand and move to alert level 1 at midnight. However, mandatory mask wearing on public transport, that's been in place in Auckland since last year's lockdown, will now be a requirement everywhere else as well. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The Valentine's Day outbreak plunged Auckland into a level 3 lockdown last week and everywhere else to level 2. From midnight, the whole country will again be at level 1. However, the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the recent outbreaks acted as a stark reminder and mask wearing on public transport will be required for the foreseeable future. There are some exceptions like school buses and for people with certain medical conditions. There was one new community case linked to the Auckland February cases reported today, who's already in quarantine. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
Ms Ardern has promised to receive the COVID-19 vaccine in front of the cameras, but will wait until the border workers and their families are vaccinated. The Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison was one of the first in line yesterday, saying it was to ease any fears about the immunisation program. Ms Ardern says she is ready and willing to do the same at the right time.
I will be publicly vaccinated, but I wanted to make sure those at the most risk were vaccinated first. I should add, I have a family member who are amongst that group. She's one of the people that really needs to be looked after, but I'll be encouraging all of my family members to be vaccinated regardless of where they work.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. Thousands of people around the country paused at 12:51 this afternoon to mark the 10-year anniversary of the Christchurch quake. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern told an anniversary memorial service for the 185 people who died that she saw hope, energy and optimism for the city in the coming decade. Ms Ardern says the past decade has been difficult for the city and at times must have felt impossible. Mayor Leanne Dalzell said today is a day of reflection and peace. She says lessons learned from that day honours the memories of those who lost their lives. People were laying thousands of flowers in the Avon River this afternoon to flow out to sea in a tribute to those who died. Workmates who escaped the fall of the CTV building say healing together as a group helped them deal with their miraculous survival. The relationship services workers who were on the top floor of the 6-storey building have been meeting twice a year for the last decade to share stories and support one another. Councillor Quinn Tang says the catch-up she's been organising have changed her life.
And this group I feel safe. I feel I can trust. I have that special bonding, sisterhood, brotherhood, something like that. I no longer feel I feel part of we. Yes, that is the biggest change for me.
CTV survivor Quintang. An unnamed district health board has been criticised over the care of a 3-year-old boy who died. Deputy Health and Disability Commissioner Rose Wall found multiple failures in his care. She said some vital signs were not observed regularly or recorded. The boy was stable overnight but deteriorated rapidly the next morning and died from bilateral pneumococcal pneumonia. Ms Wall says staff failed to think critically. She has recommended further training. A primary school teacher who married a former pupil 34 years younger has lost his teaching licence. The Teaching Council's disciplinary tribunal says the man taught the girl in years 7 and 8 and then encouraged her to form a relationship with him while she was at secondary school. Within months of leaving school at the end of 2016, they had formed a romantic relationship and in January 2019 they married. The tribunal has cancelled the man's registration and suppressed his name in order to protect the identity of his wife. It's 4 minutes past 5. The Black Caps insist they're not getting caught up in any talk about these star players not part of Australia's squad for their T20 cricket series. Steve Smith, David Warner, Pat Cummins and Mitchell Starc didn't board the plane to cross the Tasman for Australia's only matches against the Black Caps this summer. Ahead of tonight's series opener in Christchurch, though, New Zealand captain Kane Williamson says the absence of the star quartet isn't diminishing the challenge in the eyes of his team.
Well, there's still plenty of big names, as there always are. The depth in Australian cricket is, something that's always noted, and a number of their newer look players have had a lot of experience playing in other comps around the world as well. So we know they're a very strong side.
Kane Williamson. The game starts at 7 o'clock. After a 10-day break, the New Zealand Breakers are back in action in the Australian National Basketball League tonight against the Illawarra Hawks. Development player Kieran Galloway has been added to the player roster in place of Rob Lowe, who has returned to New Zealand for the rest of the season. The Breakers are at the bottom of the table and chasing their second win of the season. Meanwhile, without injured New Zealander Stephen Adams for a second straight game, the New Orleans Pelicans have recorded their biggest come-from-behind victory in the NBA. The Pelicans overturned a 24-point third-quarter deficit to beat the Boston Celtics 120-115 in overtime. That's the news.
Just started onto the zigzag track when the earthquake hit.
The Port Hills above Sumner to the east of Christchurch. It's February the 22nd, 2011.
Heard this massive crack and a rumble. It was a rockfall and it was above me.
I'm Katie Gossett and this is Fragments, first-hand accounts of the February 2011 earthquake. Tonight, the hills.
I thought, that's it, I've run out of time.
Fragments from iTunes, RNZ's podcast page and tonight on Nights with Brian Crump on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waitomo, also Taupo, Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty. Fine weather, apart from morning and evening cloud tomorrow with drizzle patches. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, fine weather. The remainder of the North Island, fine apart from a few areas of morning and evening cloud tomorrow. Nelson and Marlborough, except Kaikoura Coast, plus Bulla. Fine today, mostly cloudy tomorrow with a few showers. Westland and Fiordland, fine spells today, cloudy with rain tomorrow. For the remainder of the South Island, fine weather with some high cloud tomorrow. Chatham Islands fine, but low cloud developing tonight. RNZ National, it's 6.5 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Tonight we're in Christchurch where the community has come together to reflect on 10 years since a deadly earthquake tore through the heart of the city, taking 185 lives. But first, from midnight, Auckland will join the rest of the country at Alert Level 1. Auckland was plunged into a Level 3 lockdown for 3 days and everywhere else went into Level 2 after 3 COVID cases emerged in Papatoetoe. There is one new community case of COVID today, but Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says she's confident the situation is contained.
The 8 cases that have emerged as a result have all been linked. All close contacts of the original cases returned negative test results, other than the cases that we've already identified at Papatoetoe High School and their family members. All further cases have been genomically matched to the 3 cases and are linked to the close contact at the school. Serology on the close contacts at the LSG workplace of the mother in the initial cases all returned negative results. We've carried out wastewater testing across Auckland and other parts of the country, which produced no evidence of COVID clusters.
Cabinet has today also decided to keep in place mandatory mask wearing on public transport across the whole country. The COVID response Minister Chris Hipkins joins me now. Good evening, Minister. Businesses are wondering if there is a better way to be smarter if we have to go through alert level changes again, not lock down the whole city. Is there a smarter way of doing it?
No, I mean, we're very reluctant to use the alert level escalation as a way of managing these types of cases. And you've seen examples in recent months where we haven't escalated alert levels. You know, our contact tracing system is still our primary lever when we deal with cases like this. But in this particular case, there were extra questions. There was information that we didn't have. There was the possibility that we had undetected community transmission. In those cases, it's really better to be safe than sorry. If we had not taken the alert level escalation decision, and we'd found that there was community transmission out there, it could have spread significantly in the few days after that. And so we wanted to make sure we were eliminating that possibility.
Can't you lock down areas more specifically? Question being, If there is an outbreak, say, for example, like this one in South Auckland, why does the North Shore need to be locked down? Why can't you ring fence a smaller area?
Well, if you look at the last time we dealt with a set of community cases, was the Auckland August cluster. It was centred on Mount Wellington, and within a few days we had cases on the North Shore. So the reality about Auckland is that we've got a very mobile population. People move around Auckland.
Are you there, Minister? I think I might have just lost you.
Yes, no, I'm still here.
Great.
Yep.
So doesn't it come to how much risk you're prepared to take? So on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being no risk at all and 10, as dangerous as anything, where are you in terms of how much risk you are prepared to accept?
I'm not sure that that's actually useful. I think what you've got to do is look at each individual case and what the risk associated with each individual case is. So when this case popped up, it had a higher degree of risk around it because we didn't know the point of origin. There was a possibility it could have been picked up in the community. We had 3 different cases, all within the same family. All of them could have potentially been the source case. So we had to move very quickly to make sure we were eliminating the possibility of community transmission.
Understand that, and sorry to interrupt, but do you have generally a position of 0 risk? That's what you're operating from?
We have a low risk position.
How low? And that's what people are wanting to try and quantify so they can see on what basis you are making these decisions. So if you can put it into some form of perspective for us, how much risk are you prepared to tolerate?
Well, it's low, but like I said, you have to consider each case on its merit. So if you consider our Northland case, there was some risk there, but we were confident we could contain that using our contact tracing systems, and we did contain that using those same systems. Our Defence Force worker that we dealt with late last year, again, we contained that using our contact tracing system. This one was a little bit different. We had to be careful. We were cautious. We didn't want to see a community outbreak spread very quickly because we had been too slow to respond.
How many people do you think need to be vaccinated before you can say that lockdowns are a thing of the past?
Look, we'll understand a bit more about that in the coming months. At this point, where there's still a bit of science to go in terms of whether people can carry the virus and transmit it to others even after they've been vaccinated. While the possibility of that, the scientists would argue is low, we've still got a bit of science to understand around that. Then we've got to look at the overall effectiveness of the vaccines. Now, the Pfizer vaccine that we're getting underway with this week, that's got a very high level of effectiveness. So some studies have that up sort of around the 90% mark. So that's really encouraging. On the other hand, if the effectiveness of the vaccine was sort of down more around the 60 or 70% mark, you'd obviously need to vaccinate more people to get the sort of coverage that you need.
When will you know?
Well, the Director General of Health has said, look, what we've got to look for is somewhere around the 70%, coverage of the population to get that, and it could be higher than that, but at least kind of around that 70% mark.
If you have 70% of the population vaccinated, would you then say there will be no more? Would you be confident to say there will be no more alert level rises?
I think that certainly makes that less likely. There's other things, around the border, and so what we're doing around the border, of course, to some extent depends what happens internationally and what the vaccination rates are internationally. Then we've also got to look at the variants. So, how effective are the vaccines with any new variants, not just the ones that have emerged already, but new variants might emerge, and have the vaccinations that people have, are they effective against new variants that might emerge?
What's the total number of people now vaccinated?
We're only at a couple of hundred as of midnight last night. I haven't had the numbers for today yet, but it ramps up. In the early part of the week, we start to ramp up. Those numbers start to see us getting up to some bigger numbers as the week progresses.
So of the family, the second family that contracted COVID, we now know that all 5 of them have it. In terms of cases H and G, is that a child and an adult?
They were existing family members within the family unit. They were already isolating, so already at the jet park.
Understand,
so no additional risk.
Is one of them a child?
Yes.
Did they go to the same school?
My understanding is yes.
So they went to Papatoetoe High School as well?
Yes, that's my understanding.
And so the adult and the child, what can you tell us about how far back you are tracking people here? Because obviously we went into lockdown from February the 14th, and these 2 people would presumably have stayed put from that point onwards. Is there any need to track backwards further?
No, the advice that I've had this morning was that the most recent case, there's no contact tracing required because they've been isolating since before their potential infectious period. So they basically picked it up from their family member, already isolating when they picked it up. So no additional risk that needs to be mitigated there.
And you are confident that the incubation period for this particular strain of the virus is within 14 days?
That's correct, yeah.
OK, let's talk about the mariner who was released after a day 3 test, but before a result was returned, it turned out this person was positive and they're already on a boat going somewhere. Where are they and on what ship?
So they are on a ship that was heading towards China. This is one of the things, when you have... We basically facilitate crew changes in New Zealand. So the shipping companies do this knowing full well that it's ultimately their risk. So the people who are flying in, they basically transfer either immediately to the ship. If they have to lay over overnight, they lay over in our managed isolation facilities and they do get tested. So in this particular case, that person was tested when they first arrived in New Zealand. They were then tested on day 3. Their first test came back negative. Their day 3 test came back positive. By the time that result came through, they were already on the ship and the ship had already left.
A freight ship or a fishing ship, Minister?
My understanding is it's a freight ship.
How many others are on board that?
About 35 from what I understand.
And so what contact have you had with the ship and what assistance has been offered and where are they exactly?
So the ship was already in international waters. We are in conversations with the ship as to what support they may need. Obviously, we try and do our bit for the international community here.
But are you basically saying, not in our waters, not our problem, even though this person has walked out of managed isolation prior to getting a test result back that subsequently showed they were positive? Is that being a good international citizen?
No, I'm certainly not saying that they're not our problem. What I'm saying is that the shipping companies do crew changes, and New Zealand's not the only country that does this. Where people fly in, they transfer to the ship. The shipping company accepts that they have not done their 14 days of managed isolation in New Zealand, and so they are accepting that risk. Of course, in a case like this, we'll work with the shipping company to try and help them find a way through.
What's the name of the shipping company or the ship?
Sorry, I don't have that information.
One thing before you go, the Pullman investigation, can we please get a copy of that?
Oh, absolutely. The health
this
report...
week, Minister?
Or the health report, I believe it was being released late last week, so I'll check if it hasn't been released, but I certainly signed out the copy to be released.
OK, because we've been declined copies for it. Is there any reason why that would be the case?
No, we were proactively releasing that last week.
Appreciate your time. That is the COVID Response Minister, Chris Hipkins. It is 17 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And still to come on the programme, we speak to Auckland Chamber of Commerce CEO Michael Barnett on what changes he wants to see with regards to lockdowns. Now, a traffic update before we move on. There is a crash on State Highway 1 just north of Puhoi. A northbound lane is blocked. Now, traffic is heavy in both directions between Puhoi and Warkworth, and Wakakotahi is asking motorists to be careful, avoid the area if possible because there are delays. Thousands of people in Christchurch and around the country paused at 12:51 this afternoon to mark a decade since the February 22nd magnitude 6.3 earthquake, which claimed 185 lives. It was 10 years ago today when an ordinary Christchurch day turned into hell for so many. But in contrast to the harrowing scenes and sounds of that day, today a large peaceful crowd gathered at the Civic Memorial Service on the banks of the Avon River under large oak trees. Reporter Sally Murphy and cameraman Nate McKinnon were there.
Thousands of people gathered by the Avon River and the memorial wall, where the names of the 185 people who died are forever etched in stone. Mayor Leanne Dalzell says today is a day of reflection and peace. She says lessons learned from that day honours the memories of those who lost their lives.
And as we look to our future, we can always be reassured by the way our communities came together and continue to come together, and the love and support we receive from around New Zealand and across the world. We feel that today and are grateful indeed.
Former Mayor Sir Bob Parker was a calm voice of authority in the aftermath of February 22nd. Having recently suffered a heart attack and stroke, he was unable to speak, but did attend today's service. In a message read out by Leanne Dalzell, he remembered how in a moment the earthquake changed everyone and everything forever.
A moment that caused a level of destruction and casualty that none of us will ever forget. For those who were not here at that time, it would be difficult to really understand what we felt, what we shared, what we lost. Those who were here or whose loved ones were here share a bond that is impossible to explain beyond this place.
Then as the crowd turned to face the memorial wall, the names of the 185 who perished were read out after a minute's silence at 12:51, the exact time 10 years ago the earthquake struck.
Emma Shahar Ridden, Julie Catherine Wong, Michael Stewart Coulter Stiant.
Quake Families Trust spokesman Manal Casey, whose wife Dr Maysoon Abbas died in the earthquake, spoke about how the memories of those who died will always live on.
It is hard to realise that our loved ones, who we share the beautiful memories with, became the memories. I realise that a special bond have been established between our family, and a special friendship have been formed between families, irrespective of their culture and country of origin.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern paid a special tribute to the children who lived through the Canterbury earthquakes, saying their generation will create a legacy.
The earthquake and aftershocks affected people in complex and diverse ways. The toll could not have been more significant, and daily reminders made it harder. A fractured landscape, aftershocks, struggling friends and neighbours, and children with deep and unseen scars. 10 years on, there will be people still living their daily lives with the long shadow of that day.
Ms Ardern says in the coming decade she sees hope, energy and optimism. Anne Brower was the lone survivor from a bus which was hit by falling debris on Colombo Street. Today she attended the memorial service with Jordan, one of those who helped rescue her from the crushed bus. They say 10 years has gone quickly, but slowly at the same time.
It's pretty surreal, actually. It's quite hard to explain it to people. It's kind of like your world gets flipped upside down a little bit, and it's I don't know. It feels like you're in a war scene, I guess, is one way to describe it.
Yeah, it's just like nothing else, really. I mean, you can sort of describe it in words, but it doesn't really convey.
Meanwhile, at a separate gathering at Latimer Square, survivors of the CTV building collapse gathered together to remember their fallen colleague, Nina Bishop, an administrator at Relationship Services, and to mark the moment of silence. The group of about 22, made up of survivors and rescuers, paid tribute to Miss Bishop to honour the life of a woman described as a beautiful soul. They held hands in a circle surrounding Nina's tribute, singing a waiata and karakia. Nina's mother, Vivian McRoberts, says her daughter was also her best friend, who loved people and took work seriously.
She used to come home so stressed before the bigger earthquake happened from work, but she said, I've got to go to work, I've got to be there for my workmates and for the people. No matter how upset she got, she would just want to be there for them. I wish I'd gone and not her, because she was far, far more special. I think she should have lived on, and maybe it was just her time. He wanted her, because who she was, but it's heartbreaking. I miss her.
The staff had been meeting twice a year for the last decade to share stories and heal together, thanks to the initiative of staff member Councillor Quinn Tang. She says organised catch-ups with some of the other survivors has been life-changing for their healing process together.
So I realised I'm not alone. That is the biggest change. Before I got that sense of independent. If things happen, I'm going to sort out by myself. Solo soldier. After that, I realized I'm a member of the group, and this group is, I feel safe. I feel I can trust. I have that special bonding, sisterhood, brotherhood, something like that. I no longer feel I I feel part of we. That is the biggest change for me.
This afternoon, people are laying thousands of flowers in the Avon River, which will flow out to sea in a tribute to those who died. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Sally Murphy.
And if you were listening to that piece from Sally Murphy and our cameraman Nate McKinnon, we'll put it up on our Facebook page so you can see the video too. Scarce supplies and the cost of personal protective equipment is prompting some dentists to up their prices. Now they're calling for government support to fund and source high-level PPE to avoid their patients footing an even heftier bill. Louise Tanuth reports.
It's an issue dentists are forced to grapple with whenever COVID rears its head. The dentist is already expensive, but some clinics are upping the price because some PPE items have increased by up to 400%. Since April last year, PPE has been funded for public health workers, ordered and distributed by the Ministry of Health. District health boards, MIQ facilities, aged residential care and GPs are covered as essential, but dental clinics aren't on the list. President of the New Zealand Dental Association, Katie Ayres, says getting hold of the right gear is an ongoing challenge.
COVID arrived and there wasn't an effective supply chain in place for the increased level of PPE that we needed. And really since then we've found difficulty accessing PPE, an enormous price increase as well, masks and gloves and so on. We've seen about a 400% increase in the price of these products.
During Alert Level 2 and 3, dentists have to wear plastic masks instead of the cloth ones, single-use long-sleeve gowns and a plastic head cover, which are also single-use, along with eye protection and gloves. That comes at a cost. And Checkpoint has confirmed some dentists are charging as much as $50 extra to cover their PPE bill. Katie Ayres says some of the items are scarce and prices are going up, which she says means some dentists have no choice but to charge patients extra.
You have to pass the cost on in some way. Some dentists will itemise it as a separate fee so that the patients can see it. Others may have included it into their general pricing structure.
David Antanovic is a dentist at Vivian Dental in New Plymouth. He says the other hidden cost is extra staff and cleaning.
You probably need another assistant with the dental team, so it's another personnel, and you've got to have downtime between patients for decontamination.
While his clinic hasn't been charging patients extra, he says they need support from the government to avoid that.
We get nothing from the government. Unlike doctors, we get no subsidies whatsoever to help us each day. So everything is paid for privately. Inevitably, that's the patient.
He says that's not good enough.
And this is the point I'm trying to make, is that there's no respect from government and there's no understanding.
He's predicting getting PPE won't be the only problem this year.
It's actually the supply line has been incredibly disrupted this year, and we're just waiting every week to make sure that all our commodities and our essentials are delivered. But of course we've had some delays, and I've been warned that local anaesthetic is in short supply as well. So you might have all the PPE in the world, but you may not have any local anaesthetic to patients. So maybe we may not be staring at the elephant in the room.
The Dental Council told Checkpoint it's been getting inquiries about dentists charging patients extra to meet the cost of PPE or cleaning due to alert level guidelines. It says it's not illegal for businesses to increase their prices, and dentists are free to set their own prices. The council went on to say, if a practitioner tells a patient the reason for the price increase, it must be a genuine one. The Ministry of Health declined to be interviewed for this story. In a statement, they said they don't supply to dental clinics unless designated as an essential service at levels 3 and 4. They said they assess individual provider circumstances and may on a case-by-case basis supply PPE at a cost price at alert level 2 if the dentist is unable to secure the PPE from regular commercial suppliers. Mō te hōtaka o te yahiahi, ko Louise Tanuth, aho.
Let us know what you think of that. How would you feel about paying extra for a dental visit? Should the cost be covered by the Ministry of Health? Should they be giving dentists PPE? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or flick us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Right now, on the rising tide, rescuers are racing to refloat about 40 whales stranded at Farewell Spit at the top of the South Island. The long-finned pilot whales were spotted on the beach at 9:30 this morning, and a team of about 65 volunteers, dock rangers and experts have been keeping the mammals cool and wet throughout the day. Dock ranger Amanda Harvey is there and joins me now. Kia ora, Amanda. Can you tell us what's going on right now?
Kia ora, Lisa. Yeah, at the moment we've got the incoming tide has reached most of the whales. The volunteers are now standing in about sort of waist deep to knee deep sort of water around the majority of them. There's one large one that is a little bit not floating as much as we'd like, so we've just sent Project Jonah out with the pontoon, and they're going to pop that around that larger whale in order to help it float enough that they can start moving the pod out towards the two dock boats we've got standing by, ready to follow them when they start swimming away.
Amanda, what kind of condition are they in and how many have died during the day?
So we've lost 9 whales today. We had a total of 49 wash up, and 40 of them are still surviving, and they've been kept in really good conditions thanks to the help of the volunteers keeping them cool today. We believe that this is the first time that they've stranded. They don't appear to have any marks or abrasions from previous strandings, so they were all looking in really good health from what our staff could see.
And what's the temperature been like? And so, and the team of volunteers you've got there, quite a few people turned out. What exactly have they been doing to help the situation?
Yeah, so the conditions out here today have been stunning for the most part, but really hot. So that's been our biggest concern for the whales. Volunteers were out here pretty early. We had a few staff show out as soon as we heard about it, and they gave us a bit of an idea about the situation. And even as they arrived, there were people just willing to help, and they've been there for most of the day, just bucketing water over top of these whales, keeping them cool. And we've just kind of progressed from there with the type of volunteer we've had. We're now starting to have those volunteers that have been here since early morning. They're starting to get pretty tired, so they're moving off the beach, and we've had a new influx of wetsuited volunteers come in for what we call the wet phase, and they're now helping support the whales through this.
So, Amanda, how does that wet phase work? Do you choose a particular whale to take out first, or is there any strategy involved in it?
Every whale stranding you come to is a bit different. It just depends on the layout of the whales on the beach. And so, the idea generally is to group the whales as much as possible together. They do a lot of socialising, a lot of sort of touching base with friends and family, and so they need that time to kind of regroup before they swim away. And so it's often, a lead female that will lead the group, but sometimes that can be different. So, the idea for us is just to get them all together and let them decide who's going to take the lead and how they want to progress from there.
So 40 whales, how long do you reckon that's going to take?
Well, the whales are grouped together reasonably closely. I'm not sure the exact distance, but they're just trying to get one of those larger whales refloated now and shifted up the beach towards the others, and that will have the group pretty well grouped together enough that they'll start communicating and clicking, and the team of volunteers can start forming a bit of a barrier between them and the beach, and we're hoping at that point, with putting the larger one in the pontoon, that might be a bit of a persuasion for them to head out into deeper water, with the boat being able to secure the pontoon beside it.
How can you persuade them it's not a good idea to come back? Will you stay with them for a few hours, or how does it work?
We'll stay with them until we feel that they've either swum off deep enough, or whether we can support them throughout a decreasing tide if they do decide they don't want to swim off and the tide chases us back out again. So we can support them to a point, and then the rest of the work has to be done by them. Once they start swimming away, the volunteers can retreat off the beach, because we prefer that they don't get into too deep a water, especially on dusk, just with other things being in the ocean, like stingrays. So the boats will take over at that point, and they'll have some spotters, and they'll follow the boat, pod until it gets too dark for the boats to be on the water also. So that's about all the support we can kind of offer them at this point.
So, Amanda, will someone, though, if they seem to head off, will anyone wait there at the beach overnight just in case?
Yeah, there'll be a number of volunteers sitting here ready for early morning. So if they do swim away, we still don't trust that they won't strand again tomorrow morning. So we'll be here at first light in order to locate them and then see what the situation is. But hopefully, we've got the best conditions we could ask for out here. A slightly small tide, but yeah, we couldn't ask for better wind conditions than that. We're really hopeful that this is going to be successful tonight.
Before you go, what is the deal with Farewell Spit? Because it seems to be a bad spot for this kind of thing.
Yes, they've been stranding here for many years before any project owner or dock or any sort of organisation to help save them was invented. So, yeah, this has been an ongoing thing, and, yeah, scientists are still unravelling the reasons why this occurs.
Really appreciate your time this evening, Amanda. Best of luck. That is Dock Ranger Amanda Harvey at the whale stranding there, where they're on the turning tide trying to get these 40 whales back out to sea. And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, the woman who managed to escape the collapsing CTV building. The Corrections Minister has asked for a please explain from his department after a highly critical court ruling. And we talk to business about how the government can do better when there's another COVID outbreak. We'd love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Get in touch. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time to get to the headlines now with Susanna.
Auckland will drop to COVID alert level 1 at midnight tonight after the Valentine's Day outbreak put the city into level 3 lockdown last week. However, the government has decided to keep mask wearing mandatory on public transport across the whole country, apart from children under 12 and people with certain medical conditions. The COVID-19 response Minister Chris Hipkins has told Checkpoint he understands a community case of COVID-19 reported today as a child in a family of existing cases and also attends Papatoi High School. There have been 6 new cases of the coronavirus in managed isolation today. The Prime Minister has committed to being publicly vaccinated, but not until all border workers and their families have been inoculated against COVID-19. Her Australian counterpart, Scott Morrison, was one of the first in line across the Tasman, saying he had the jab in front of the cameras to ease public fears about immunisation. Jacinda Ardern says she is willing to do the same, but those working at the border need to come first. A minute of silence was observed at 12:51 this afternoon to mark 10 years to the minute since the devastating 2011 Christchurch earthquake. The city's Mayor Leanne Dalzell says lessons learned from that day honour the memory of those who lost their lives. Thousands of flowers laid on the Avon River have flowed out to sea this afternoon in a tribute to the 185 people who died. The Canterbury District Health Board has been strongly criticised over the way it handled the care of a 3-year-old boy who died. Deputy Health and Disability Commissioner Rose Wall found there were multiple failures in his care. The child was admitted to the children's ward, but some of his vital signs were not observed regularly or recorded. He died the next day of pneumonia with indications of sepsis. The country's international credit rating has been raised by one of the leading agencies because of the strength of the recovery from the pandemic. S&P Global Ratings has raised New Zealand's rating to AA+, with a stable outlook for AA with a positive outlook. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Let's get to the business news now with Nicholas Poynton, who is in our Wellington studio. Nicholas, we heard there in the headlines about our country's international credit ratings had a bit of a boost. Well, what does that actually mean in practical terms?
Yeah, look, this was some quite significant news that came through late this afternoon with Standard & Poor's, one of the big global ratings agency, otherwise known as S&P. They've raised the country's credit rating, as you heard in the bulletin just before, from AA to AA+ with a positive outlook. And with this, S&P, they have a letter-based metric system that it uses to measure a company or a country's ability to really service their debt. So it's the quality of the debt that the metric is measuring. The highest rating is AA+. We're just underneath that on is on AAA. We're just below that on AA+, but it goes all the way down, AAA, AA+, AA, all the way down to D, which means default, probably the worst rating you could possibly get. And S&P says this upgrade was the first of any economy since the outbreak of the pandemic. The agency says New Zealand has recovered quickly, the most advanced economies from the pandemic, because of the fact that when the coronavirus entered this country, we did a pretty good job of keeping it under wraps. And because of this, it was off the view that the government's debt position was able to withstand any further damage from any negative shocks to come to the economy, even the possible weakening of the housing market. And on that, it made note that the booming real estate market and the rise of private debt was a risk, but one that was manageable because as a country we have relatively low levels of debt and we do have good headroom to cover something like a significant correction to the housing market. Now, S&P, they also had a pretty rosy outlook when it came to sort of New Zealand's economic growth. They say that the economy is forecast to grow at about 3.2% each year over the next 3 years. Now, over the medium term, that may not be as positive as some people were hoping. But, last week I was on the show talking about Westpac's economic forecast, and they were predicting growth of significantly weaker than that, of about 2% in 2021. They were really taking into account the impact of closed borders and no international tourists coming into this country. So these improved ratings from the global ratings agency S&P, they sort of give international lenders confidence to lend to a country like New Zealand at a better rate because our risk of defaulting on that debt is relatively low.
Let's talk about Freightways now. So they've done all right through the pandemic, it seems.
Yeah, the transport and data management company, which owns brands like New Zealand Couriers, Post Haste and a number of others, they actually have seen a strong turnaround in its fortunes after its bottom line was really hurt by the lockdowns last year. Now, the company's half-year profit, it has actually fallen by a quarter to about $21 million compared to about $29 million. This is their half-year result. But that number there is a little bit misleading because its net profit after tax was actually hit or affected by some outstanding costs relating to the acquisition of the refrigerated transport company Big Chill. So if you account for that, its net profit was actually about $41 million, which is up about 40% on last year. Revenue, well, that was up by a third to about $410 million. That's reflecting the contributions from Big Chill to its earnings, but also about a 46% increase in business-to-consumer deliveries, which is just really further evidence of how our consumer habits have really changed since COVID-19 first landed on our shores. The company says package volumes across all its businesses that it operates, they're up about 11%. Looking ahead, this company didn't give us much in the way of a full year forecast in terms of its profit, nor did they say that if they believe that these consumer trends, this growth they've seen in deliveries was really sustainable. But it did highlight some other key issues that the business is likely to face. Chief among them is climate change. The company acknowledged that it's a big carbon emitter by virtue of its diesel-powered vehicles and the emissions it gets from aircraft it operates or it contracts. It says it's really taking steps to address this, such as increasing volumes or making its routes more efficient. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to finding some diesel-powered or vehicles that are alternatives to diesel-powered vans and trucks. Because right now, at the moment, in terms of EVs and hybrid vehicles, the company CEO who I spoke to today says they did a trial recently and they found that a hybrid van, they'd need about 2 hybrid vans to do the job of one diesel van. That's because they don't have the same capacity as a diesel van, and on top of that, the cost of a hybrid van or a hybrid equivalent to a diesel-powered van was about 50% more. So the economy, they can't really make the economics work at the moment, and this is an issue that isn't just related to Freightways. You can imagine it'll be a factor for a lot of transport companies and businesses in this country. Freightways chief executive, he reckons we're probably about 2 to 3 years away from having a vehicle that can do the job of a diesel one at the moment.
And Nicholas, before you head off, what numbers have you got for us from the markets?
Yeah, the NZX was down by about 122 points or 1% to 12,426. We saw some profit taking, some losses, some falls in the value of big companies like Mainfreight and EBOS. In terms of the dollar, well, the dollar got a real shot in the arm from this update we got from S&P earlier. The dollar is currently at 73.1 US cents, but it did get as high as nearly 73.4. And we look at it ourselves with the Australians, we're buying about 92.7 Australian cents. Bitcoin, that's about 76,000 New Zealand dollars for a single Bitcoin at the moment.
$76 grand. Thanks, Nicholas. That's Nicholas Poynton with Business News there. Just one CTV employee who was in the building during the February 22nd earthquake managed to escape before it came down. For Marianne Jackson, the pain of losing 16 colleagues has been compounded by the lack of accountability following the catastrophic collapse that killed 141 people. She sat down with our reporter Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nate McKinnon.
Marianne Jackson had just returned from an early lunch. She was standing in CTV Managing Director Murray Wood's office, busy organising Friday night drinks for a departing colleague. But as she walked back to her ground floor reception desk, 18 seconds of hell changed everything.
I held on for a while in the big windows, windows all around, and then the doors. And they were all bending in and out. The staircase I just came down was moving out of the wall.
Jackson nearly went to grab her bag. She says the split-second decision not to saved her life.
What made me really get out was the noise. The noise was horrific. It was like a plane or a train landing on the roof. And I was on the ground floor. And this was a 6-storey building, so it was breaking up as I was running out. And there was a canopy over our front door, and I thought, how on earth, I just hope I get out of this. So I ran across the road, and I was in the middle of the road and just quickly took a glance back, and the building had pancaked. It was already down by the time I got over the other side of the road. And I was standing on the corner of Blackwell Motors, just shaking like a leaf, couldn't cry, just in absolute shock. It felt like in a movie. It felt like a horror, a end-of-the-world movie.
It was clear no one else had made it down the stairs and out the front door with her. But then, metres in front of her was a welcome sight. Her colleagues, presentation director Tom Hawker and his colleague and girlfriend Penelope Spencer, were alive.
I looked over to the CTV site again, and here was Tom and Penelope, who I worked with. And I was so pleased to see them. It was just... ran over to them and we just hugged each other. They thought I was in the building and I thought they were too. But luckily they were having a late lunch break, and they were in the middle of the road in Cashel Street. They were on the other side and I was running across the other road, but they heard all the screams from the building, which they have to live with.
It was a dreadful contrast to the joyous scenes just a few days earlier when much of the CTV crew celebrated Tom's 21st birthday.
I knew they couldn't get out, but we always thought they'd be rescued.
But Marianne Jackson was the only CTV employee that escaped the building. There were 14 of her colleagues' funerals in the aftermath.
Some 2 a day, one on one side of town and one on the other. I tried to go to all of them. And then the last 3 were memorials because they didn't find any. They had to send DNA away overseas. And it was exhausting, but they all had beautiful funerals that showed their personality.
Adding to the pain for Marianne Jackson is the bitter knowledge that justice hasn't been served, on the back of a police investigation that resulted in no charges being laid.
And there were 300 faults with that building, and none of us felt safe in that building. A truck would go past or a bus and the whole building would shake, and there were gaps upstairs. We could hear the gym next door just along from us. We could hear, and you could see daylight through some of the cracks. So especially upstairs, and a lot of the girls that passed away in the building, they didn't feel safe at all. They complained too. They did complain that they didn't feel safe.
Despite dealing with her own trauma, the last decade has also been spent battling to have her house properly repaired. Marianne says she, her surviving workmates and the other CTV families have never given up fighting for their colleagues and relatives.
I feel that I was one of the lucky ones that got out that day, and that's why I've had to fight for them too, in their memory, and to help their families get justice and accountability.
Marianne says whenever an anniversary comes around, it makes the earthquake feel like yesterday. Every year, her and her colleagues gather at the CTV site on the corner of Madras and Cashel Streets. They remember the fun times. Marianne says there were plenty of those. There's usually a service, flowers are laid, and sometimes songs are sung and balloons released. All in memory of their mates who never made it out. For Checkpoint, Nick Trubridge.
And that story from Nate and Nick will be on our Facebook page if you want to see the video. It is 12 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. After 6 tonight, the vaccine rollout continues for the country's border workers, and the little school in Christchurch reflects on its big and long battle to stay open. A man has told a court he believes his drink was spiked by what he calls a predatory and utterly creepy businessman. The businessman, who has name suppression, is accused of indecently assaulting 3 men on separate occasions in the early 2000s, 2008 and 2016. Jordan Bond was at the High Court in Auckland, and a warning, parts of his report are distressing.
This man recalled being invited to a meeting at the businessman's house after he'd asked for a few $1,000s funding for a venture. Without being asked, he says the accused mixed him a gin and tonic and then later a second, with both drinks being made with his back turned so he couldn't see them. He also had a glass or two of wine for dinner, and shortly after, he began feeling very strange. The man's voice has been distorted to protect his identity.
I was beginning to feel dizzy. I was beginning to feel nauseous. I felt like I was starting to have less control over my body. I didn't feel good, and it's not a feeling that I've ever felt since.
He later decided he'd been drugged, although he didn't know it at the time. He told the jury he was feeling more and more woozy as he was being given a tour of the house, which ended in the man's bedroom. There, he was shown an adjoining bedroom and told by the businessman, "This is where you would stay." He says he knew then he needed to leave.
I was starting to feel just terrible. And also because the tone of where things were going was really uncomfortable and creeping me out. It's one of those moments that you experience in life where every cell in your body is just saying, it's time to get out, it's time to go.
But as he turned and began to walk out, he says the accused came up behind him
and put his hand on my backside and squeezed it and said in my ear, "God, you've got such a sweet ass." I just froze. I kind of got a fright. And then he started to kiss the back of my neck.
Feeling increasingly worse and in danger, he vigorously tried to go.
All I wanted to do, my only motivation, was to try to get out and get home, because I was afraid of what was going to happen, what could happen. I could feel that I was losing the capabilities of my body and my vision, and I had this person with utterly creepy behaviour following me.
He managed to leave the house and get a taxi, and when he got home, he says he vomited and could barely talk to tell his partner what happened. The lawyer for the businessman, David Jones QC, suggested the entire story of being drugged and assaulted was not true. It was a fiction made up by the complainant because he screwed up the meeting and wasn't successful in getting the money. The dizziness, he said, was actually because he'd had too much to drink.
I suggest the most that happened, as far as physical touching is concerned, is the handshake.
Well, you weren't there, and I was, and I know what happened to me and what parts of my body were touched.
The complainant described that evening as a horrible thing he wanted to move on from, and was wary that if he did go to the police, it'd drag on for years and he'd end up in a situation just like this, in a court, being accused of lying.
I don't make up stories of assault and being drugged and lie to people so that I can end up in a situation like this, just to apparently, according to you, excuse myself for not getting $5,000.
The man said he only came forward 10 years later because he'd heard someone else had accused the same man of similar behaviour and wanted to stand in solidarity with them. The trial before a jury in Justice Venning continues. For Checkpoint, Jordan Bond.
The Corrections Minister has asked Corrections for its side of the story after a judge ruled inmates at Auckland Women's Prison were treated in a degrading and inhumane way. Manukau District Court Judge David McNaughton made the stinging ruling when assessing whether inmate Mihi Bassett should have her sentence extended for arson at the prison in 2019. He says she and fellow inmate Karma Cripps, who were gassed in their cells and forced to perform a humiliating ritual in order to be fed, were subject to a concerted effort to break their spirit. Amnesty International says serious questions need to be raised about whether their treatment amounted to torture. Political reporter Yvette McCullough has more.
In his ruling, Justice McNaughton says Corrections broke its own rules and regulations multiple times in the treatment of Mihi Bassett and Karma Cripps. His ruling confirms treatment first exposed by RNZ last year, including that the women had to remove their underwear in front of male guards in order to get clean pairs and were at times denied toiletries and sanitary products. He says the use of cell-buster pepper spray to force them out of their cells was excessive, and a practice of making them lie on the floor to receive food was inhumane. Justice McNaughton says the women's evidence was powerful and compelling, and he had no reason to doubt it. Amnesty International Executive Director Meg Durand says this is incredibly distressing.
How can we ever imagine that women and men will be able to integrate back into our society and be good members of our community when the people that should have looked after them have treated them so horrifically? We really need to take this seriously.
The ruling also says Corrections acted unlawfully when it held Bassett in a segregation unit known as the Pound for 4 months after lighting a fire in protest of having bin liners removed. Ms Durand is calling for an independent review.
This could potentially amount to torture if it was found that Corrections indeed was using these practices to punish these women and to try and get compliance with particular behaviours. That would be unacceptable, and it would be breaking the conditions of which they are allowed to lock people up.
But Corrections Minister Kelvin Davis says Corrections weren't given the chance to tell their side of the story.
When they went to that court case, they were there to address the arson, and then all these allegations were made around, which has sort of clouded the court case. But I need to see what exactly Corrections' version of the events are.
Mr Davis says while there's been an admission that behaviour escalated on both sides, he's been told that allegations inmates had to undress in front of male guards are false.
I've been assured that that practice is not happening, and that's what I say. There are two different accounts to what's happening and to what's been said, and so I need to find out for myself exactly what the facts are.
But Greens Corrections spokesperson Golriz Garaman says there needs to be far more transparency and accountability.
We have had this ruling now, but it's incredibly rare for people as marginalised as women prisoners to get access to this level of judicial oversight of their treatment.
National's Corrections spokesperson Simeon Brown says the judgment speaks for itself and the minister needs to take responsibility.
To ensure that the corrections system is keeping in line with his Hokairangi strategy, which is designed to try and make sure that our prison system is more humane. He's the one who's gone around the country heralding those changes.
Calvin Davis says he expects Corrections to come back to him within the coming days or weeks and then will decide what further steps may be needed. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Yvette McCullough.
Spain has now vaccinated more than 2.5 million people, 1 million of them with a second dose. Infections are falling, but as the BBC's Tim Smith discovered, it's this mammoth vaccination effort that's putting a massive strain on the country's public health system.
Cafe and restaurant terraces in central Barcelona buzz with happy customers, in a scene that could make you forget there's a pandemic in full swing. Even after a serious spike in cases, Spain's national government believes it can overcome this third wave of COVID-19 without a full national lockdown. But behind this optimism, the country's public health sector is under huge strain as the nation continues its vaccine rollout. So much so that retired and student nurses have been called on to join the effort.
My name is Maria Ramos Cabot. I'm a student of nursing here at Hospital Clínico of Barcelona. Over the last few weeks, I've been studying as well as working here, part-time job at the ICU. Directors always keep needing you to go work from Monday to Tuesday to Wednesday, Thursday, from the beginning of the week to the end of the week. So it's really hard working and it's really tough sometimes.
It's not normal necessarily for a student nurse to be working in an ICU. Why is that?
Because I believe this is an exceptional situation that requires exceptional solutions. It really shows the need to develop and train new nurses to help and manage this situation.
Maria isn't wrong. At the same hospital, I met Adelaida Zabalegi, Director of Nursing here, who spelled out the problem.
Spain has a chronic shortage of nurses. For many years we have been telling our government at the national level that Spain is one of the European countries with less amount of nurses per population. Spain has 5.7 nurses per 1,000 people.
And that report was from Tim Smith in Spain. Let's get to some of your feedback now. This on a story we've run about some dentists charging patients more because of the increasing costs of PPE. Liz has got in touch and says, considering the car my dentist drives, the vehicle I use to get there and the planning I have to do to afford a dental visit, I have no sympathy whatsoever for dentists. Another one says, tell the dentist to absorb or part absorb the cost from their already fat profit margin, to exclamation marks. That's from Paul, who calls himself a dentistry victim from Cambridge. And this one, dentists are private, no public health providers. Cost of doing business should not be funded publicly until they start offering public service. One other person disagrees, though, says they should get a bit of help.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui, ko Susana Leata with DNA. Auckland will return to level 1 from midnight, but health authorities still don't know how last week's cases in Auckland caught the virus. The region was plunged into level 3 lockdown following the discovery of 3 cases of COVID-19 in Papatoetoe. 4 others in the community have since tested positive, but are all either close contacts of the original cases or household contacts linked to the original cases. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says finding the source isn't always crucial.
We've had a couple of hypotheses, a couple of theories that public health officials continue to pursue. All of them are considered, however, to be unlikely, and none of them have stood in the way of the Director General, Dr. Ashley Bloomfield, having confidence to recommend to Cabinet that we lift alert levels today.
Jacinda Ardern says mandatory mask wearing on public transport is now in place for the whole country. A mariner who left managed isolation yesterday and subsequently tested positive for COVID-19 is on board a cargo ship heading to China with 35 others. The worker tested negative on day 1 in managed isolation, and their positive day 3 test result came in after the crew member had boarded the commercial vessel. COVID-19 response Minister Chris Hipkins has told Checkpoint the ship was already in international waters by the time the positive test was returned.
The shipping companies do crew changes, and New Zealand's not the only country that does this. Where people fly in, they transfer to the ship. The shipping company accepts that they have not done their 14 days of managed isolation in New Zealand, so they are accepting that risk. Of course, in a case like this, we'll work with the shipping company to try and help them find a way through.
The case had no contact with port workers and the risk to the community is considered very low. A man who lived through the Christchurch earthquakes and father of a March 15th terror attack victim says the 10-year memorial service marks a chance to move forward. Hundreds gathered in the city today to remember a 6.2 magnitude earthquake that struck at 12:51 p.m. in 2011, claiming the lives of 185 people. John Milne was in Christchurch during the earthquake and his 14-year-old son was shot dead in the 2019 terror attack. He says flowers dropped into the Avon River today were a symbol of closure to those affected by the city's tragedies.
This is so lovely to see so many people out here enjoying and remembering what a terrible time we've been through. The flowers to me it's water under the bridge, as you can see. Water under the bridge, and they'll all flow out eventually to the sea.
Christchurch resident John Milne. The government will provide updates about the movements of the New Zealand-born woman and her 2 children arrested by Turkish authorities, but only as far as national security allows. National wants the government to be transparent about what's happening to them after they were caught trying to enter Turkey illegally from Syria. Suhaira Aydin is accused of being a terrorist belonging to Islamic State. It's believed Turkey has begun moves to deport her and her children. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says New Zealand continues to work with Turkish authorities with the best interests of the children and the safety of the country in mind. The Canterbury District Health Board has come in for criticism over the way it handled the care of a 3-year-old boy who died. Deputy Health and Disability Commissioner Rose Wall found there were multiple failures in his care. Andrew McRae reports.
He was admitted to the children's ward, but some of his vital signs were not observed regularly or recorded. After being stable overnight, his condition deteriorated rapidly the next morning. He died from bilateral pneumococcal pneumonia, and tests indicated he had developed sepsis, a life-threatening response to infection. Ms Wall says staff failed to think critically and as a result failed to escalate the boy's care and explore the possibility of sepsis more thoroughly. She's recommending further training for paediatric medical staff. Ko Andrew McRae tēnei.
A man is accusing a predatory, high-profile businessman of drugging his drink and indecently assaulting him once he was inebriated. All 3 complainants and the accused have name suppression. One man says he was invited to the businessman's house for a meeting where he was given 3 or 4 drinks. He alleges later he was indecently assaulted while inebriated. He began feeling dizzy and nauseous and knew he had to get out.
Because I was afraid of what was going to happen, what could happen. I could feel that I was losing the capabilities of my body and my vision, and I had this person with utterly creepy behaviour following me.
The complainant, whose voice has been distorted to protect his identity. It's 5 minutes past 6. The Australian cricket captain Aaron Finch says they're wary of a Martin Guptill resurgence in their T20 series in New Zealand. The Black Caps opener has been given the green light to play in tonight's opening match after shaking off a hamstring injury. Guptill's inclusion in the team has come under fire with the emergence of up-and-coming players, but Finch isn't expecting the Aucklanders' lack of runs to continue.
With guys, especially who are so dynamic at the top of the order, sometimes can take one shot, one innings, and they're back flying again. So he's someone that we're doing a lot of planning for, a lot of preparation. You never take anyone with his quality and skill lightly.
Aaron Finch. Luna Rossa have won the right to face Team New Zealand in the America's Cup, and the Italian sailing team expect the New Zealand boat to be fast. But Team New Zealand helmsman Peter Burling says just how much their boat Te Rehutai has advanced will become clear when the Best of 13 Cup Series begins on March 6th.
Guess we'll get to find out in 2 weeks' time. It's definitely a good step on from where we were in December, especially in a lot of, trickier parts of the spectrum.
Peter Burling. Golfer Tiger Woods is in doubt for the Masters in April. The 45-year-old American, who has recently undergone a 5th surgery on his back, is waiting on the results of an upcoming MRI to see when he might return to action. 2 years ago, Woods capped one of the most remarkable comeback stories in professional sport when he ended an 11-year major drought to pick up his 5th Masters win. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, My Robot Could Draw That. Artist Tom White talks about his latest work, still life drawing, completed by machine, driven by computer algorithm. Paul Barrington, aka DJ Below, spins the music of Johnny Jewel. Vinnie Wiley discusses Pacific sport, and we begin a special week-long series marking the 10th anniversary of the Christchurch earthquake, Fragments, on Nights of me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service until midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waitomo, also Taupo, Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty. Fine weather, apart from morning and evening cloud tomorrow with drizzle patches. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa fine weather. The remainder of the North Island fine, apart from a few areas of morning and evening cloud tomorrow. For Nelson and Marlborough, except Kaikoura Coast and Bulla, fine today, mostly cloudy tomorrow with a few showers. Westland and Fiordland fine spells today, cloudy with rain tomorrow. For the remainder of the South Island, fine weather, some high cloud tomorrow, and Chatham Islands fine but low cloud developing tonight. RNZ National, it's coming up to 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Auckland will join the rest of the country in COVID Alert Level 1 from midnight tonight. But is there a better option than a large-scale lockdown if or when there's another outbreak? For super city businesses, the last week has been messy. First, the 3 days in Level 3 and then this last weekend, Level 2 restrictions with rules around seated guests in restaurants and no large gatherings. Michael Barnett is the Auckland Chamber of Commerce CEO, and he told me when the next outbreak emerges, it needs to be dealt with differently.
I think looking forward, we'll have to do it differently. We can't shut down, the whole of the New Zealand economy by shutting down regions. So I think we'll need to be more clinical in the way that we operate.
So how could that work in your view?
I think, for instance, if I look at Patatoto, where we identified that we had a community case, we could have put a ring around that. We could have prevented a certain amount of movement. If we identified a further case and it was Manukau, we could have extended the no-go area and could have moved like that. When you look at it, it was stupid shutting down north of the Harbour Bridge or putting the South Island into Level 2. We must be more clinical.
The question is, though, in practical terms, is that really possible? It's a big city. What do? How do you ring fence part of South Auckland or West Auckland or the central city? How do you physically do that to stop people moving in and out?
I think a part of it's going to be about a community taking responsibility. But if we're prepared to put the police in and have borders shut, moving people between Auckland and North and Auckland and South, then we're going to have to try and think of a way to do this. We can't keep shutting down regions.
Realistically, though, roads in and out of Auckland, you're talking about main trunk thoroughfares. If you're talking about neighbourhoods or suburbs, there's a lot more options for people to get in and out. Can we trust people? If we're going to use a trust model, which is, I think, a little bit of what you're suggesting, can we actually trust people to stay put?
I think we are going to have to do something that's different than what we're doing at the moment. I think if people understand the consequences, then we should get their cooperation. But there must be a better way than shutting down a whole of a region and shutting down the whole of an economy.
Would you be comfortable accepting that level of risk by not going the full hog and putting the entire city up a level?
I think if I have a look at where we were in March of last year and look at where we are now, I think we know more about the science of this. We know more about the management of it. People understand it better. We're going to have to get a better cooperation to be able to come up with a better model. A better model doesn't cut down the whole of an economy.
Auckland's inner city has looked particularly bare, right, over the last few days. Last Friday, for example, even though there was a relaxation, it was empty. How would you describe the CBD's health at the moment?
I think most of the cafes, the hospitality sector are down 40, 50, 60%, and they'll be looking for every opportunity that they can to start up and have a continuity of business.
Is that just because of the most recent lockdown, or is it compounding?
I think some of it's compounded. There's any number of shops and cafes and places that have got for sale or for lease signs on them. We're going to have to look at the centre of Auckland and ask what is it that we can do to revive, what is it that we can do to make it the main shopping centre of Auckland.
One of the arguments would be that we should have learnt something from the last lockdowns and that a number of businesses can operate pretty well at level 2 or even higher if they've adapted and have an element of their business online. Realistically, what percentage of businesses don't have that option?
I think there's a significant number of businesses that do, but if you look at the centre of Auckland, you've got a high level of hospitality, food and beverage. You've got firms that are dependent on people coming into town to work. And the first thing that happens when we go into lockdown is that people stop coming into town to work, and that's lost customers for the centre of the city.
The announcement came at just after 3 this afternoon. What do you make of the timing?
I think the timing's awful when you think of certainly the hospitality, the food and beverage, for them to be able to organise staff, fill their fridges and freezers and get food available to be able to operate tomorrow is going to be difficult. I think we could come up with something that's a little bit more user-friendly than that.
What would you have liked to have seen?
I'd like to have seen something this morning. It's all very well for Cabinet to be meeting this afternoon and for us to benefit from their meeting. If we're going to do something, having something happen first thing in the morning is going to give people a day to get prepared, staff and product that they can have in their shops the next day.
So, are they giving enough consideration in making these decisions and the timing of these decisions to people who are actually out there at the coalface working in business?
I think the businesses, if they had had a better indication earlier on today, they would have been better prepared, not only as to be able to operate as businesses, but to satisfy the demands of the client base. Again, I see this as a part of the learning. Let's hope some of these mistakes we don't make next time, because there will be a next time.
And that was Auckland Chamber of Commerce CEO Michael Barnett. And Sarah's got in touch to say, why is a notice period necessary when we go down a level? Surely struggling Auckland businesses should be given the opportunity to open tonight now that the decision has been taken. The various preparations required when moving up a level shouldn't apply when moving down. So why, says Sarah. The most at-risk workers at the ports of Auckland have lined up for their COVID vaccinations today, with most saying they barely felt a scratch. The rollout continues as Papatoetoe High School students return to school today after a week-long closure because of cases there. And as health correspondent Rowan Quinn reports, the first Wellingtonians have also now been vaccinated.
Stevedores, border control officers and ship fumigators were among those taking time out from their busy jobs at the ports of Auckland to get vaccinated. Stevedore Wiremu was one of the first to line up at the white marquee that's become a temporary vaccination centre.
Just like the flu vaccine, they just stab you and then sit for half an hour, then I'm off.
Customs Officer Dean was not long after. Like most, he'd jumped at the chance after getting a text on Friday to come down.
Perfectly fine, felt nothing, absolutely nothing. And I'm a big sook when it comes to needles, but it was fine.
Lee drives cars off the big vehicle ships. He says though there was a bit of a wait, everything that counted went smoothly.
The jab is like any other jab, it's over and done with. They give you lots of answers to any questions you've got. It's just a matter of sitting there now for the next 30 minutes and waiting and see if there was a reaction to it. And while I was in there, nobody seemed to be adversely affected, so it's all good.
It's the contact with overseas ships that puts these workers at risk from COVID, and 1,200 are due to be vaccinated in this first run. Stevedore Des says he's pleased to get the first layer of protection. There's another injection in 3 weeks' time.
For my safety, for everybody else that I'm hanging around with, I don't want to catch it and pass it on to anybody else, so I'm hoping that it'll work.
Most of those spoken to by RNZ are keen, but some are still on the fence, saying they're concerned that it's a new vaccine, or they're worried after reading posts on social media. And some are worried if they don't get it, they won't be allowed to work. But Ports of Auckland says it's only strongly encouraging people to get vaccinated. Meanwhile, Wellington's had its first COVID vaccinations today, 37 staff working at the Grand Mercure Hotel managed isolation. The joint head of MIQ, Megan Main, says the rollout to the capital's an important step in protecting New Zealanders from the virus.
We're rolling out through the air border, the ports are coming up this week as well, and we just continue to add to the rollout over the days.
She says no workers have refused the test and their families will be notified soon when their vaccination dates will be. Back in Auckland, the school bell's ringing again at Papatoetoe High School, where classes have resumed for the first time since 3 students contracted COVID-19. There's ample hand sanitiser, social distancing, and many students are choosing to wear masks. Year 12 student Shannon Montrose says she's a bit scared.
We haven't been at school for long, and obviously our school did have COVID, so it's like,
what's going to happen and like how is our classes going to go now.
Principal Vaughan Quio thinks further cases are highly unlikely following the week-long break and a testing blitz. He was by the gates this morning checking to ensure only those who've tested negative for the virus come to class. He says 41 students aren't on that list yet, but none are close contacts of the cases.
First impression's really positive, right? We'll check attendance and chase people today, but the phones are going pretty hot in the office with parents concerned about what now and all that sort of thing, which is really understandable. It is no different to the other 2 lockdowns we've had. Can you please let me know your status? Can I send them today? Have the media moved away from the front gate? You know, that sort of stuff. And just trying to lower the levels of anxiety in our community.
And he says 70% of students have come back today, which was much higher than when the school returned after the city's level 3 lockdown last year. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Rowan Quinn tēnei.
It is 19 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. In the years that have followed the devastating Christchurch earthquake, there have been many stories of the struggles people have faced. Tonight we bring you the tale of the little school in Christchurch's east that took on Wellington's big decision makers and won. Redcliffe School finally reopened last year after spending the best part of a decade battling for its survival. Our reporter Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nate McKinnon caught up with Redcliffe's principal, Rose McInerney, to reflect on a tumultuous last 10 years.
It had been a relatively normal lunchtime at Redcliffe School. Some students were playing on the school playground while others tucked into Marmite sandwiches and packets of chips. Deputy Principal Rose McInerney was taking choir practice. But when the clock struck 12:51 on February 22, 2011, the sound of music was replaced by the sound of fear.
Yeah, we were literally thrown up in the air and landed on the floor of the multi-purpose room. And then, you know, once we calmed, we moved everybody outside to our front field. And I've just got this massive memory of as we moved all of the children to the front field, we saw there was lots of roadworks going on that day, and we just saw lots and lots of people in orange coming towards us to help us because they knew there was a school here and they could obviously see just clouds of dust coming from the cliff.
Fast forward 10 years and McInerney is now principal at Redcliffe's. We joined her on a stroll from the school's new site at the old Redcliffe's Park to its former site on Main Road. The old school was set in front of an enormous cliff, the foot of which is now fenced off. The remnants of red zone houses are perched at its peak. It's a still day here today, stark contrast to that horrific day 10 years ago.
Yeah, huge clouds of dust were just all, you know, probably the clouds of dust just rolled forward.
Plumes, yeah.
And so everyone stopped and dropped, did what they were supposed to. And then once things settled, we just all, so I was teaching choir in that building over there. And we all came out and all just came to the very front. And of course, we had people coming to help us. We had parents arriving, some injured, some not. It was absolute organised chaos as we just looked after everybody and did what you do.
There are a lot of memories at the old site. Most of them, bar February 22, are happy.
How long was the school on this site, roughly?
About 108 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of history.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was massive for all the locals because they'd done a lot of community fundraising for some of the buildings and the things in the school. So yeah, we made sure that we were involved with, like, all the kids came down on demolition day and things like that, just so they're part of the whole process.
The earthquake changed the school's future forever. It's been through a tumultuous 10 years. Students have spent time learning at what most Kiwi kids wouldn't recognise as a school. For some time, they were based at Van Ash Deaf Educational Centre in Sumner.
I think just the initial closure, the thought we might close was such a shock, because we had already shown such huge determination to move sites several times, and whānau stuck with us, and we set up new systems, and we were just constantly creating things and making sure that the children's learning came at the forefront. And so when Hekia Parata came down to visit our school, we were really expecting good news. And so it was such a shock to get the announcement that we might close.
That decision was reversed in July 2016 when Hekia Parata announced the school would stay open. And finally, in March last year, the day that made 9 years of slogging it out worth it.
You would sacrifice much to be here.
Students were welcomed onto the new site to the tune of Welcome Home by Dave Dobbin, who flew down for the grand opening along with Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern.
There was just so much understanding in that room of what we'd all been through together, and a great sense of pride in our community for sticking it out.
Some signs of the old school remain, like the old school bell, which rings at the end of each term. But there are some new touches too.
It's our bell. It's our school bell.
Is it?
Yeah. We choose new songs for each break time. So that'll end in a few seconds.
Who chooses the songs?
The kids.
We'll have to work that in there.
Pretty funny, eh?
We'll work
so
that in
each
there
break
somehow.
time.
That's hilarious.
It's really cute because the little 5-year-olds, they get up and dance, you know?
Every day, the kids of Redcliffs choose a new song to groove to as they start and finish lunch. It's a sign of happier days for this Eastern Christchurch school on the back of a devastating earthquake, then years of banding together and battling away. So how does Rose McInerney sum up that last decade?
An absolute roller coaster that was all about people sticking together for a common goal. And I think that common goal being children and a community being revitalised after such an epic, difficult event, to come out with this amazing outcome. An absolute roller coaster, but with so many more highs than lows.
The small school's 10-year battle, a sign of the plight of so many in post-quake Christchurch. For Checkpoint, Nick Trowbridge.
Wellington Mayor Andy Foster isn't winning any popularity contests with some of his city councillors as they grow increasingly frustrated with his management style. But others maintain he's the best person for the job, while he himself has cast criticism against him as pure politicking. Eva Corlett reports.
The Mayor threw a cat amongst the pigeons last week with an 11th hour proposal that opens up the way for selling off part of the capital's beleaguered Central Library. Councillors voted 9-6 in favour of investigating a public-private ownership model. But those against want the Auditor-General to investigate what they call a shambolic process. 36 hours before the council was due to meet to make major 10-year decisions on the city's future, Andy Foster sent out an email including the library proposal. Councillor Fleur Fitzsimons, who holds the library's portfolio, was shocked at the late addition.
It needs proper analysis, scrutiny and financial modelling, and the council has done none of that. In fact, a previous decision of the council made only in July was that the building would remain in council ownership. So there's a real disconnect between what the council's decided and what the Mayor brought at the last minute to an inferior committee of the council.
Ms Fitzsimons says that compelled her to write to the Auditor-General seeking an investigation into the process. She says the Mayor is making it difficult for councillors to have faith in the information they're getting.
The Mayor's approach was flippant. It was a flip-flop compared with his previous position of council ownership, and it really just doesn't comply with basic principles of good governance and transparency. It's very disappointing and problematic.
Councillor Tamitha Paul, who voted against the proposal, supports an investigation. She says the Mayor lacks leadership when he should be building consensus and goodwill with councillors.
What we had instead was little information about what exactly his plan was and what these last-minute additions to the plan, what the implications of those were. And that's what caused such a massive fiasco on the day. And that's not traditionally how a mayor acts. And I think that really displays his leadership style, which isn't necessarily a team approach. It's more of a lone wolf approach.
Councillor Jill Day, also against the proposal, says the last-minute changes made a mockery of the work the councillors had been putting in on the long-term plan.
I'd say there's a high level of frustration amongst councillors. We've been working together for the past year to create a long-term plan that addresses many of the challenges, and these last-minute changes really undermine that process.
Ms Day says the language used in the proposal was vague and believes some councillors didn't fully comprehend what it meant. But some of those councillors are sticking by their decision, and the Mayor.
Without doubt, Andy Foster is the best person around that table to be leading the council, without a question.
Councillor Sean Rush says the proposal doesn't necessarily mean the library will be sold off.
It's an unhelpful narrative which otherwise actually spoils what I thought was a really good day, where we did go through an awful lot of good discussion, excellent debate. We had some great advice from our officers, and even though it took us an eternity, we came out with a long-term plan which is bankable.
Councillor Diane Calvert, who also voted for the proposal, says a pragmatic approach is needed.
I have utmost confidence in the Mayor. I just wish a number of my colleagues would actually get behind the Mayor and the City to enable us to deliver on a fiscally and affordable budget.
Mayor Andy Foster says Councillor Fitzsimon's request for an investigation into the proposal is a delaying tactic designed to muddy the waters.
We basically had three options. We either blow our debt ceiling to pieces, we defer the library by potentially several years, or we take a very, very large cut to the rest of the capital program, and that would have meant cutting the investment in pipes, our transport infrastructure, and in investing in climate change. And I think that would be completely irresponsible.
Mr Foster says the backlash from some councillors is disappointing and frustrating.
Everything could always be done differently with a council which is prepared to work collaboratively, that is trustworthy, and that is going to look at things creatively to deliver the solutions that our city needs instead of playing politics.
This afternoon, the Mayor and Councillor Fitzsimons clashed openly in emails sent to journalists. The Mayor accused the councillor of seeking to hide a deficit in social housing and delay strengthening the library. Councillor Fitzsimons rejected those statements as untrue. The proposal will go out for consultation under the long-term plan and will be voted on again at a later date. E te whanganui atara mō te hōtaka o te ahia hinei, ko iwa kōle tēnei.
That's all we've got time for tonight. If you were wondering, the school bell in that piece about Redcliffs was Queen. Don't stop me now. We'll be back tomorrow. Have a great night.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. A seaman who tested positive for COVID-19 after leaving managed isolation yesterday was already on a cargo ship heading to China when his results came back. Auckland will move to level 1